The music swirled through the smoke-filled saloon like a serpent, and Grace Jordan moved her aching feet across the makeshift stage, because refusing meant another night without food. Portland, Oregon in the spring of 1883 was supposed to have been her fresh start, her escape from the debt collectors who had hounded her family back in Missouri. But 3 months after arriving on the westbound train with nothing but a carpet bag and her mother's silver locket, she found herself trapped in a different kind of prison. The Golden Rose Saloon sat on the muddy streets near the waterfront, where ships brought timber workers and sailors who threw coins at her feet while she danced to the bawdy piano music that never seemed to stop. Her dress was red and tattered at the hem, chosen by Silas Drummond, the saloon owner who had offered her a job washing dishes and then informed her 2 weeks later that she owed him for room and board, for the dress, for the meals she had eaten, and the only way to pay it back was to dance. Grace was 22 years old and had never imagined her life would come to this. Back in Missouri, she had helped her father run a dry goods store until consumption took him, and then the creditors came like vultures. Her mother had died when Grace was just a child, leaving her with few memories but that silver locket and a fierce determination to make something of herself. She had heard that Portland was a growing city, full of opportunities for those willing to work hard. What she had not anticipated was how quickly money disappeared in a strange city, how landlords demanded payment up front, how jobs for respectable women were scarce and already claimed by those with connections and references. The piano player, a thin man named Cornelius with tobacco-stained fingers, launched into another raucous tune. Grace lifted her arms and spun, her dark hair coming loose from its pins. The men at the tables hooted and stamped their feet. Some were loggers with calloused hands and red suspenders. Others were merchants taking a break from their shops. A few were drifters passing through, their eyes hard and their intentions unclear. She kept her gaze fixed on a point above their heads, trying to pretend she was somewhere else, anywhere else. Silas stood behind the bar, his thick arms crossed over his barrel chest, watching her with the cold calculation of a man who saw profit in everything. He had told her just yesterday that her debt had grown again. Apparently, she owed him for the candle she burned in her tiny room, for the soap she used to wash, for the very air she breathed under his roof. She knew it was all lies, all manipulation, but what could she do? She had no money to leave, no place to go, and Silas had made it clear that if she tried to run, he had friends who would find her and bring her back. The door to the saloon swung open, letting in a gust of cool evening air that carried the scent of rain and pine. Grace glanced toward the entrance and saw a tall figure silhouetted against the fading daylight. The man who entered was a cowboy, though that term seemed almost too simple for someone who carried himself with such quiet confidence. He wore a dark hat pulled low over his eyes, a worn leather vest over a blue shirt, and dusty trousers tucked into scuffed boots. A gun belt hung at his hip, the holster tied down in the manner of someone who knew how to use it. He moved through the crowd with an easy grace, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. Grace felt something shift in her chest, a strange flutter that was both hope and fear. She had learned not to trust the men who came into the Golden Rose. They wanted entertainment, nothing more. Yet something about this cowboy was different. He did not leer or shout. He simply watched her with an intensity that made her feel seen, truly seen for the first time in months. The song ended, and Grace curtsied mechanically, gathering the coins that had been tossed onto the stage. Her fingers trembled as she collected the money, knowing that Silas would take every cent and claim it against her fictional debt. As she straightened, she saw the cowboy approach the bar. He spoke to Silas in a low voice, his words inaudible over the general din of the saloon. Silas frowned, shook his head, but the cowboy pulled out a leather pouch and placed it on the bar with a heavy thunk that suggested gold coins inside. Grace descended from the stage, intending to retreat to her room before Silas demanded another performance. But before she could slip away, Silas called out to her, "Grace, get over here." She approached reluctantly, her heart hammering. Up close, the cowboy was even more striking. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar traced a thin line along his jaw, giving him a dangerous edge, but his expression was calm, almost gentle. "This here is Morgan Quinn," Silas said, his voice tight with poorly concealed irritation. "He has paid your debt in full and then some. You are free to go with him." Grace stared at Silas, then at Morgan Quinn, certain she had misheard. "What? You heard me," Silas snapped. "Your debt is paid. Get your things and go." Morgan turned to face her fully, and for the first time she saw a hint of emotion in those gray eyes. "Madam, I know this must seem strange, but I could not stand by and watch what was happening here. If you would like to leave this place, I have paid the fee that was keeping you here. You are under no obligation to me. I can arrange for safe passage to wherever you wish to go, or I can simply walk you out that door and wish you well." Grace felt dizzy. Freedom. He was offering her freedom with no strings attached. It seemed impossible, a dream that would shatter the moment she reached for it. "Why would you do this?" Morgan removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "My mother was trapped in a situation not unlike yours when she was young. A good man helped her escape, and she always taught me to do the same when I saw injustice. I have been in Portland for 2 days, and I heard about this place and what happens here. When I saw you dancing, saw the look in your eyes, I knew I had to do something." Tears burned in Grace's eyes. She had been strong for so long, refusing to cry even on the worst nights. But this unexpected kindness broke something loose inside her. "I have nothing. No money, nowhere to go." "Then perhaps you would consider traveling with me, at least until you decide what you want to do," Morgan said. "I am heading to a ranch about 30 miles east of here, in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. The owner is a friend of mine, and they are always looking for help. It is honest work if you are interested. Good pay, decent people. You would have your own cabin and your freedom." Silas made a disgusted noise and turned away, apparently done with the transaction now that he had his money. Grace looked at Morgan's open, honest face and made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Let me get my things." She ran upstairs to the cramped room she had occupied for the past months. Her possessions fit easily into her carpetbag: 2 dresses, some undergarments, a hairbrush, and her mother's locket. She took one last look at the peeling wallpaper and stained floor and felt nothing but relief. When she came back downstairs, Morgan was waiting by the door. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him through his shirt sleeve. They walked out of the Golden Rose Saloon together into the cool evening air. Grace took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the scent of rain and freedom. The street was busy with people finishing their business before nightfall. Wagons rumbled past, and somewhere nearby a dog barked. Everything looked different now, brighter somehow, full of possibility. Morgan led her to a hitching post where a beautiful chestnut mare waited patiently. "This is Juniper," he said, patting the horse's neck affectionately. "She is gentle and has carried me safely for many years. I am afraid I only have the one horse, but she can carry us both to the livery where I have my other mount." "I can walk," Grace said quickly, not wanting to be a burden. "It is nearly dark, and these streets are not safe for a woman alone," Morgan replied. "Please, allow me to help you." He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then extended his hand to her. Grace hesitated only a moment before grasping it. He pulled her up behind him as though she weighed nothing. She settled onto the horse, acutely aware of how close they were, how she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance. Through his vest, she could feel the steady beat of his heart. They rode through Portland streets as the gas lamps were being lit. The city was a strange mix of old and new, with wooden buildings standing beside newer brick structures. They passed a church with a white steeple, a general store closing up for the night, and a restaurant where the smell of frying meat made Grace's stomach growl. She could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. Morgan must have hurt her stomach because he said over his shoulder, "We will get some food before we leave town. There is a boarding house not far from the livery that serves decent meals. You must be hungry." "I do not want you to spend any more money on me," Grace protested. "You have already done so much." "It would be my pleasure," Morgan said simply, and something in his tone told her that arguing would be pointless. The livery stable was a large building that smelled of hay and horses. Morgan dismounted and helped Grace down, his hand steady on her waist. She felt a strange warmth where he touched her, a sensation that lingered even after he let go. Inside the stable, a gray gelding nickered softly in recognition of Morgan's voice. "This is Sterling," Morgan said, leading the horse out of his stall. "He is stronger than he looks and has a good temperament. Between him and Juniper we can make good time tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Grace asked. "I thought we would stay in Portland tonight and leave at first light," Morgan explained. "I have a room at a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She is a good woman, and I am certain she can provide you with a safe place to sleep for the night. In the morning, we will head to the ranch." Grace nodded, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in her circumstances. Just an hour ago, she had been trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Now she was standing in a clean stable with a man who seemed genuinely interested in helping her, planning a journey to a new life. It felt surreal. They walked to the boarding house, leading both horses. The building was a neat two-story structure with lace curtains in the windows and a flower box that would soon be blooming with spring flowers. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a warm smile. She took one look at Grace's worn appearance and immediately ushered her inside. "Poor dear, you look exhausted," Mrs. Patterson said. "Morgan, you did not tell me you were bringing a guest. I will prepare another room immediately." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson," Morgan said. "And if it would not be too much trouble, could we get some supper?" Of course. "Sit down in the dining room, both of you. I have beef stew and fresh bread." The dining room was cozy, with a long table covered in a checked cloth. Grace sat down carefully, still not quite believing this was real. Morgan sat across from her, and in the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. His face was weathered from years in the sun, but there was a gentleness in his expression that made her feel safe. His hands, resting on the table, were strong and scarred from hard work. Mrs. Patterson brought out bowls of steaming stew and thick slices of bread with butter. Grace ate slowly at first, trying to maintain some dignity, but hunger won out and she found herself eating with desperate enthusiasm. The food was simple but delicious, and she felt warmth spreading through her body for the first time in what felt like forever. "How long were you at that place?" Morgan asked quietly, not looking up from his own meal. 3 months, Grace replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I came to Portland thinking I could start fresh. My father died and there were debts. I lost everything. I thought I could find work here, but jobs are scarce, and Sila's offered me a position washing dishes. By the time I realized what he really wanted, He had created this elaborate debt that kept growing no matter how much I worked. Morgan's jaw tightened. Men like him prey on the desperate. I am sorry you had to endure that. Why did you really help me? Grace asked, needing to understand. You do not know me. I could be anyone. Morgan met her eyes and she saw complete sincerity there. I told you about my mother, and that is true. But I also saw something in you when you were dancing. You looked like a wild bird in a cage, something beautiful that was meant to be free. I could not walk away from that. Grace felt her cheeks flush. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such raw honesty. I do not know how I will ever repay you. There is nothing to repay, Morgan said firmly. Just promise me that you will take this second chance and make the life you deserve. They finished their meal in comfortable silence. Mrs. Patterson showed Grace to a small but spotlessly clean room on the second floor. There was a real bed with a quilt, a washstand with a pitcher of water, and a window that looked out over the street. It was more luxury than Grace had known in months. There is a bath down the hall if you would like to wash up, Mrs. Patterson said kindly. I will bring you some night clothes. You look about the same size as my daughter was before she married and moved to Seattle. Grace thanked her, voice thick with emotion. When Mrs. Patterson left, Grace sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. They were tears of relief and gratitude and hope. She washed her face in the basin, then ventured down the hall to find the bathroom. The prospect of a real bath was almost overwhelming. The hot water was heavenly. Grace scrubbed away months of grime and shame, washing her hair with the lavender soap Mrs. Patterson had provided. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel, she found a clean nightgown laid out on her bed. She dressed and climbed under the quilt, expecting to lie awake with her mind racing. Instead, she fell asleep almost immediately, her body finally relaxing now that she was safe. Morning came with sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds singing. Grace woke feeling more rested than she had in months. Someone had left a simple brown traveling dress outside her door, along with sturdy boots that looked nearly new. Mrs. Patterson's kindness brought fresh tears to Grace's eyes. Downstairs, Morgan was already up, sitting at the dining table with a cup of coffee. He stood when she entered, a gesture of respect that made her heart flutter. Good morning. I hope you slept well. Better than I have in a very long time, Grace admitted. Mrs. Patterson left me these clothes. She is a generous soul, Morgan agreed. We have a good ride ahead of us today. Are you up for it? I am ready for whatever comes next, Grace said, and she meant it. After a breakfast of eggs and biscuits, they prepared to leave. Mrs. Patterson hugged Grace goodbye and whispered, Morgan Quinn is one of the good ones. You are in safe hands, dear. Morgan helped Grace mount Juniper, then swung up onto Sterling. They rode out of Portland as the city was waking up, merchants opening their shops and workers heading to the docks and lumber mills. Grace did not look back. That chapter of her life was over. The road east took them through dense forests of Douglas fir and cedar. The air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine and the sound of birdsong. Morgan pointed out landmarks as they rode, telling her about the area. He had grown up in Texas, he explained, but had come west 5 years ago looking for work and adventure. He had worked various jobs, from ranch hand to trail guide, before settling into his current position at the Quinn Ranch. Wait, it is called Quinn Ranch? Grace asked. Is it your family's ranch? Morgan laughed, a warm sound that made her smile. No, just a coincidence. The owner is Thomas Mercer, and he named it after his grandmother's maiden name. When he hired me and learned my surname, he thought it was a good omen. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Mrs. Patterson had packed for them. They sat on a fallen log near a small creek. eating cheese and bread while the horses drank from the clear water. Grace watched Morgan from the corner of her eye, noticing the way he moved with confidence and care, how he checked on the horses before seeing to his own needs, how he spoke to her as an equal rather than something to be managed or controlled. "Tell me about this ranch," Grace said. "What would I be doing there?" "Quinn Ranch raises cattle and horses," Morgan explained. "Thomas and his wife, Mary, run it with a small crew. There is always need for help with cooking, mending, sometimes helping with the horses if you are comfortable around them. Mary handles most of that, but she has been wanting assistance, especially with their children. They have 3 young ones who need watching while everyone is working." "I like children," Grace said, "and I can cook and sew. My mother taught me before she died." "Then you will fit in well," Morgan said. "The people there are like family. They will treat you right." As they continued riding, Grace found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait. She had ridden as a child, though it had been years. The forest around them was beautiful, and she felt as though she was moving through a different world entirely from the grimy streets of Portland. Here, everything was green and alive, untouched by the desperation of the city. They talked as they rode, sharing stories of their lives. Grace learned that Morgan's mother had indeed been helped by a stranger when she was young, trapped in a similar situation in San Antonio. That man, a Mexican rancher named Carlos, had not only freed her from her debt, but had helped her find honest work and eventually introduced her to Morgan's father, a cowboy passing through. They had married and settled down, raising Morgan and his 2 sisters on a small ranch outside of Austin. Both of Morgan's parents had passed away in the last few years, his father from a heart ailment and his mother from influenza. He had drifted west after their deaths, looking for a new purpose. "I think my mother would have liked you," Morgan said quietly. "She had the same fire in her eyes that you do, that determination not to be broken by circumstances." Grace felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would have liked to meet her. She raised a good man." Morgan ducked his head, looking almost shy. "I just try to do right when I can." They reached Quinn Ranch as the sun was beginning to set. The property was beautiful, nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance. There was a main house built of sturdy logs, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals where horses grazed peacefully. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Grace could hear children laughing somewhere nearby. Thomas Mercer came out to greet them, a tall man in his 40s with graying hair and a welcoming smile. "Morgan, you are back, and you have brought a guest." "Thomas, this is Grace Jordan," Morgan said, dismounting and then helping Grace down. "I was hoping you and Mary might have that position available that you mentioned." Thomas looked at Grace with shrewd but kind eyes. "Any friend of Morgan's is welcome here. Let us get you both inside and hear the full story." Mary Mercer turned out to be a warm-hearted woman with flour on her apron and a baby on her hip. When Morgan explained Grace's situation, carefully omitting the most degrading details but making it clear she had been trapped in an unjust arrangement, Mary immediately embraced Grace like a long-lost sister. "You poor thing," Mary said. "Of course you can stay here. We have a cabin that has been empty since our last hand moved on. It is small but comfortable, and heaven knows I could use help with these wild children and all the work around here." The 3 children, ranging in age from 2 to 8, peeked around their mother's skirts with curious eyes. The oldest, a girl named Sophie, smiled shyly at Grace. That evening, Grace found herself seated at a long table with the Mercer family, Morgan, and 2 other ranch hands named Billy and James. The meal was hearty and delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. Grace felt accepted in a way she had not experienced since her father died. These were good people, the kind who worked hard and treated each other with respect. After dinner, Morgan walked Grace to the cabin that would be her new home. It was indeed small, just one room with a bed, a stove, a table, and a chair. But it was clean and private, and most importantly, it was hers. A fire had already been laid in the stove, and someone had left fresh linens on the bed. "What do you think?" Morgan asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I think it is perfect," Grace said honestly. "I cannot believe this is real. Yesterday I was trapped, and today I have a home and a job and people who seem genuinely kind." "It is real," Morgan assured her, "and you deserve every bit of it." They stood in the doorway, and Grace became acutely aware of how close they were. She could see the details of Morgan's face in the lamplight, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the fullness of his lips, the strong line of his jaw. She realized with a start that she was attracted to him, deeply attracted in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. You saved my life, Morgan Quinn." "You saved yourself," Morgan replied. "You just needed someone to open the door." He tipped his hat to her and turned to go, but Grace reached out and caught his hand. He stopped, looking back at her with surprise. She squeezed his hand gently, trying to convey the depth of her gratitude and the confusing tangle of feelings growing inside her. "Good night, Morgan." "Good night, Grace." She watched him walk back toward the bunkhouse where he stayed with the other ranch hands, then closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. She had only known Morgan Quinn for a day, but already he had changed her entire life. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to find out. The next weeks fell into a comfortable rhythm. Grace woke each morning to the sound of roosters and the distant lowing of cattle. She helped Mary with the children, teaching Sophie to read and playing games with the younger ones while Mary managed the household. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and helped in the garden. The work was hard but satisfying, and at the end of each day, she fell into bed tired but content. Morgan was often around the ranch, working with the horses or riding out to check on the cattle. Grace found herself looking for him throughout the day, her heart lifting whenever she caught sight of his tall figure. They fell into an easy friendship, talking whenever their paths crossed. He taught her to ride better, spending patient hours helping her regain confidence in the saddle. They rode out together on Sundays, exploring the beautiful countryside around the ranch. One Sunday, about a month after Grace arrived, they rode to a high meadow carpeted with wildflowers. The view stretched for miles, mountains rising blue in the distance and the valley spread below them like a patchwork quilt. They dismounted and walked through the flowers, and Grace felt a peace she had never known before. "This is my favorite place," Morgan said. "I come here when I need to think." "It is beautiful," Grace agreed. She picked a purple flower and twirled it between her fingers. "I never thanked you properly for what you did, Morgan. You gave me my life back." "You have thanked me 100 times," Morgan said with a smile. "Besides, it has been a pleasure having you here. The ranch feels more like home with you around." Grace felt her pulse quicken. There was something in the way he was looking at her, an intensity that made her breathless. "Morgan, I need to tell you something. I have been feeling, that is, I think I might be developing feelings for you that go beyond friendship." Morgan took a step closer, his gray eyes searching her face. "Grace, I have been fighting my feelings for you since the moment I saw you in that saloon. I did not want to presume, did not want to make you feel obligated after everything I did, but the truth is, I think about you constantly. You are in my head when I wake up and the last thought I have before I sleep." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "Truly." "Truly," Morgan said, reaching out to cup her cheek with his calloused hand. "Grace Jordan, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. You have been through hell and come out stronger. You are kind and hardworking and beautiful inside and out. I am falling in love with you, and it terrifies and thrills me in equal measure." Grace leaned into his touch, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too, Morgan. I think I started falling for you the moment you walked into that saloon and saw me as a person, not just entertainment." Morgan leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Grace rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Grace felt as though fireworks were exploding inside her chest. She wrapped her arms around Morgan's neck, and he pulled her close, deepening the kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Morgan rested his forehead against hers. "Grace, I want to court you properly if you will have me. I want to build a future with you." "Yes," Grace whispered. "Yes to all of it." They spent the rest of the afternoon in that meadow, talking about their hopes and dreams. Morgan told her that he had been saving money with the goal of eventually buying his own small ranch. Grace confessed that she had always dreamed of having a family, a real home where love and laughter filled the rooms instead of silence and worry. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's hearts. When they returned to the ranch, hand in hand, Mary took one look at them and broke into a delighted smile. "Well, it is about time," she said. "We have all been wondering how long it would take you two to figure out what everyone else already knew." Thomas clapped Morgan on the shoulder. "She is a good woman, Morgan. You two are well matched." Over the following months, Morgan courted Grace with a sweetness that made her heart melt. He brought her wildflowers and carved her a small wooden box for her mother's locket. They spent every spare moment together, riding through the countryside, sitting by the creek talking until the stars came out, stealing kisses in the barn when no one was looking. Grace blossomed under the attention and love. The haunted look that had shadowed her eyes when she first arrived faded completely, replaced by joy and confidence. She laughed freely and easily, her smile lighting up the ranch. Morgan looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in the world, and Grace had never felt so cherished. In the fall, as the leaves turned gold and red, Morgan asked Grace to take a ride with him. They returned to the meadow where they had first confessed their feelings, now covered in autumn colors. Morgan helped Grace dismount, then took both her hands in his. "Grace Jordan, this past year has been the happiest of my life. You have brought light and love into my world in ways I never imagined possible. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me." He knelt down on one knee, pulling a simple gold ring from his pocket. "Will you marry me, Grace? Will you be my wife and my partner in all things?" Grace was crying again, but these were tears of pure joy. "Yes, Morgan Quinn. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she pulled him to his feet, kissing him with all the love in her heart. They held each other as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. They were married in the spring of 1884. Exactly 1 year after Morgan had walked into the Golden Rose Saloon and changed both their lives forever. The ceremony was held at the small church in the nearest town, with the Mercers and the ranch hands in attendance. Grace wore a simple white dress that Mary had helped her sew, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Morgan wore his best suit, his hair combed back and his face shining with happiness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Morgan kissed Grace with such tenderness that several people in attendance wiped away tears. At the reception held back at the ranch, there was music and dancing and more food than Grace had seen in years. But the best moment came when Morgan swept her into his arms for their first dance as husband and wife, holding her close as they swayed to the fiddle music under strings of lanterns. "I love you, Mrs. Quinn," Morgan whispered in her ear. "I love you too, Mr. Quinn," Grace replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Thomas and Mary gave them a wedding gift that left them both speechless. 20 acres of land on the eastern edge of the Quinn Ranch property, perfect for building their own small ranch. "You have both worked so hard," Thomas said. "You deserve to have something of your own." Morgan and Grace built their home together, literally. With help from Thomas and the other ranch hands, they constructed a sturdy log cabin with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting room. They built a small barn for their horses and cleared land for a garden. It was hard work, but Grace had never been happier. Every log they placed, every nail they hammered, was a step toward the life they were creating together. By the summer of 1885, they were settled into their new home. Grace had turned the cabin into a cozy haven, with curtains she had sewn herself and furniture that Morgan had built. They had purchased a small herd of cattle and several more horses. Morgan proved to be an excellent rancher, and Grace managed the household accounts with the same determination she brought to everything else. In the fall of that year, Grace discovered she was pregnant. She told Morgan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, his arm around her shoulders. "Morgan, I have news. We are going to have a baby." Morgan turned to her with wonder in his eyes. "A baby, truly, truly," Grace confirmed, laughing at his stunned expression. Morgan let out a whoop of joy and lifted her carefully into his arms, spinning her around before setting her down gently. "We are having a baby. Grace, you have made me the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and by the end, she was exhausted and uncomfortable. But Morgan was attentive and loving, rubbing her sore feet and bringing her cool water on hot days. Mary came over often to check on her and share advice from her own pregnancies. Their son was born in May of 1886, arriving after a long labor that left Grace exhausted but exhilarated. Morgan was there throughout, holding her hand and offering encouragement. When the midwife finally placed the baby in Grace's arms, she looked down at the tiny, perfect face and fell completely in love all over again. "He is beautiful," Morgan said, his voice thick with emotion. "Grace, you are incredible." They named him Matthew Joseph Quinn after both their fathers. Matthew was a healthy baby with a strong set of lungs and his mother's dark hair. Morgan was a devoted father from the start, rising in the night to walk with the baby when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son with wonder in his eyes. Grace watched Morgan with Matthew and felt her love for her husband deepen even further. He was patient and gentle, singing old cowboy songs in his deep voice to lull the baby to sleep. He built a cradle with his own hands, carving horses and stars into the headboard. He worried constantly about Grace, making sure she rested enough and ate well. The years that followed were filled with joy and hard work. The ranch prospered under their joint efforts. Morgan proved to have a gift for training horses, and they began breeding and selling quality mounts that became sought after throughout Oregon. Grace kept the books and managed their household, growing a garden that provided vegetables and herbs. She also began taking in sewing work from nearby families, her skill with a needle becoming well known. Matthew grew into a curious, energetic toddler who followed his father everywhere, his small legs working hard to keep up with Morgan's long strides. In 1888, Grace gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Rose, who had their father's gray eyes and their mother's stubborn chin. The cabin rang with the sound of children's laughter, and Grace sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life. On quiet evenings after the children were asleep, Grace and Morgan would sit on the porch together, holding hands and watching the stars. "Do you ever think about that night?" Grace asked one evening. "The night you walked into the Golden Rose. I think about it often," Morgan admitted. "I thank God I was in the right place at the right time. I was so scared," Grace remembered. "But then you appeared and something told me to trust you. You were my guardian angel, Morgan Quinn." Morgan pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You saved me too, you know. I was drifting before I met you, going through the motions but not really living. You gave me purpose, Grace. You gave me a reason to build something lasting." As the years passed, their ranch continued to grow. They added more land, more cattle, and expanded their horse breeding operation. Matthew grew into a tall young man who had his father's way with horses and his mother's head for business. The twins were inseparable, wild and free-spirited girls who could ride before they could walk properly. Grace never forgot where she came from or how close she had come to losing everything. She became known in the area for helping women in difficult situations, offering them work or resources or simply a listening ear. More than one young woman found refuge at the Quinn Ranch while getting back on her feet. Morgan supported these efforts completely, understanding that Grace's empathy came from her own experiences. In 1895, when they had been married for 11 years, Morgan came home one day with news. "I was in town today and heard something interesting. The Golden Rose Saloon burned down last month." Silas Drummond apparently left town years ago, run out by debts of his own. Grace felt a sense of closure at the news. That chapter of her life was truly over, nothing but ashes now. "I hope he never hurt anyone else the way he hurt me." "You survived him," Morgan said. "You survived and built something beautiful. That is the best revenge." As their children grew older and more independent, Grace and Morgan found they had more time for each other again. They took rides together in the early mornings, watching the sun rise over their land. They sat by the fire on cold winter nights, Grace reading aloud while Morgan whittled and the children played. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. When Matthew turned 18 in 1904, he announced his intention to marry a girl from town named Sarah, a sweet young woman who shared his love of horses. Grace and Morgan gave them 20 acres of their land as a wedding gift, helping them build their own home just as Thomas and Mary had helped them years before. The twins, now 16, were being courted by 2 brothers from a neighboring ranch, and Grace suspected more weddings would be coming soon. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Morgan took Grace back to the meadow where he had proposed. They were both older now, with gray threading through their hair and lines around their eyes from years of smiling. But when Morgan took Grace in his arms and kissed her, she felt like that young woman in the tattered red dress again, full of hope and wonder. 20 years, Morgan marveled. It has gone by so fast. 20 wonderful years, Grace corrected. And I look forward to 20 more and 20 after that. I love you, Grace Quinn. You are my heart, my home, my everything. I love you too, Morgan. You gave me freedom, but more than that, you gave me love. You showed me what it means to be truly seen and valued. Every day with you has been a gift. They stood together in that meadow, surrounded by wildflowers, and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Below them, their ranch spread out like a kingdom they had built together through love and hard work. Smoke rose from the chimneys of multiple buildings now, their family having grown to include not just their children, but the families their children were starting. As the years continued to roll by, Grace and Morgan became pillars of their community. They were known for their fairness, their generosity, and the deep love that was evident in every interaction. They celebrated the marriages of their twin daughters in a double ceremony in 1906, watching with pride as Emma and Rose started their own families. They welcomed 7 grandchildren over the following years, and their cabin once again filled with the sounds of children playing. Morgan retired from the hardest ranch work in his late 50s, leaving the day-to-day operations to Matthew and his brothers-in-law. But he never stopped working entirely, still rising early to check on the horses and help where he could. Grace continued to sew and garden, and she wrote long letters to women who reached out to her seeking advice on escaping difficult situations. On a warm spring evening in 1920, when they had been married for 36 years, Grace and Morgan sat on their porch watching yet another sunset. They were both in their 60s now, their bodies slower but their minds sharp and their love as strong as ever. Matthew and his family lived in the main house now, having taken over full management of the ranch. Grace and Morgan lived in a smaller cottage they had built, cozy and perfect for just the two of them. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked, taking Morgan's weathered hand in hers. Morgan thought for a long moment. "Only one. I wish I had walked into that saloon sooner so we could have had even more time together." Grace smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "We have had a good life, Morgan Quinn, better than I ever dreamed possible." "The best life," Morgan agreed. "Because I lived it with you." They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the darkening sky. Around them, their land stretched out in all directions, worked and loved by multiple generations now. Their children and grandchildren were happy and healthy, building their own dreams. And it had all started with one act of courage and kindness in a smoky saloon in Portland so many years ago. Grace leaned her head on Morgan's shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. This man had saved her in every way a person could be saved. He had given her freedom, love, family, and a life beyond her wildest dreams. And she had given him the same in return, their love a circle that completed them both. As they sat together watching the night deepen, Grace reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. She thought about that terrified young woman dancing on a saloon stage, certain her life was over. She thought about the tall cowboy who had paid her debt and led her out the door into a new life. She thought about every moment since, every joy and challenge and triumph. "Thank you," she whispered to Morgan, "for everything." "Thank you," Morgan replied, "for choosing me, for building this life with me, for loving me. You are my miracle, Grace." They sat together on that porch until the moon rose high in the sky, casting silver light over the ranch they had built together. Their love story had started with an act of rescue, but had blossomed into something far greater, a partnership built on mutual respect, deep affection, and unwavering commitment. They had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, raised a family and built a legacy. And through it all, their love had only grown stronger. As the years continued to pass peacefully, Grace and Morgan remained devoted to each other until the very end. When Morgan passed away quietly in his sleep at the age of 72 in 1925, Grace held his hand and whispered words of love until his last breath. She mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, and in the memories of their beautiful life together. She lived another 5 years, spending her days with family and sharing stories of Morgan's courage and kindness with anyone who would listen. When Grace passed away in 1930, surrounded by her loved ones, her last words were, "Tell Morgan I am coming home." They buried her next to Morgan on a hill overlooking their ranch, beneath a tree they had planted together decades before. On their shared headstone, Matthew had inscribed simple words that captured the essence of their love story. Together in life, united in eternity, their love changed the world. And it had changed the world, at least their corner of it. The Quinn Ranch continued to prosper through multiple generations, always run with the values of fairness, hard work, and compassion that Grace and Morgan had established. The story of how they met, how Morgan had rescued Grace from the Golden Rose Saloon, and how their love had transformed both their lives, became a cherished family legend passed down to each new generation. Their great-grandchildren would sit on that same porch decades later, watching the same sunsets, and hear the story of Morgan Quinn and Grace Jordan. They learned about courage and kindness, about standing up against injustice, about the transformative power of love. They learned that one person's actions could change a life, and that two people committed to each other could build something lasting and beautiful. The meadow where Morgan had proposed remained a special place for the family, and it became tradition for Quinn descendants to get engaged there, continuing the legacy of love that had started so many years before. The land Grace and Morgan had worked so hard to build continued to thrive, testament to the foundation they had laid not just in terms of the physical ranch, but in the values and love they had instilled in their family. In the end, Grace and Morgan's story was one of rescue, redemption, and enduring love. It was a story of two people who found each other at exactly the right moment, who chose each other every day for the rest of their lives, and who built something beautiful together, despite the difficult circumstances that had brought them together. It was a love story for the ages, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope and help can appear when least expected, and that true love, once found, can last forever.